Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about learning the lessons from failure. And I know failure is the big F word that none of us want to say because we never want to admit that we have failed, and that's certainly something we don't want to strive to do. But there are some really good things that can come out of failure, and so we're going to talk about those today. So, what we know is that failure is critical to success because we know that success is rarely a straight line. Rarely, if ever, in our lives do we set out for a goal and we just make every correct decision along the way and it leads us directly to our goal and we successfully complete that without any failure along the way. If that is you, then that is awesome, but that's not normally how it happens for most people in their personal lives or in leadership. So, but what we know is that when we fail, it does inspire us to learn. So, we learn much more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. Because if something was a success, we typically just move forward and go on to the next step in the stage in order to reach our goal or whatever it is that we were doing. But if we fail, especially if you're like me, you're going to analyze every little tiny part of that situation and wonder how did failure happen and when did it occur so we can learn never ever to do that same thing again. Failure and invention are inseparable twins, which means that without failure, we can't have invention. The light bulb was not made on the first try. There was 100 different ways that they found and failed to make a light bulb. But what they did is they learned 100 ways not to make a light bulb. So we need to embrace our failure because this opens up opportunities for us. Um, it gives us a chance to explore different things. And sometimes failure shows you that you weren't going the right direction. And so that helps you turn around and look for a bigger, better way to do something. We fear failure because bigger failures affect more people than just ourselves. So a lot of times when we think about failure, we think that if we fail, then we will let our family down. If we fail, then we'll let our group down. We'll let our organization down. So we don't want to have a negative effect on the people around us. But what we really have to understand is that if you have a good group, if you have a good family, they're going to embrace you in your failure and they're going to help pick you back up and learn from that failure and move on. So I want you to stop right now and just think about what does failure mean to you personally? So most people avoid failure because they don't want to suffer, because failure is often associated with pain. Failure costs us time, money, and a lot of times physical and emotional pain. It can be painful because it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. If you get up in front of the class and you completely forget your speech and you fail at doing your presentation, it can be very embarrassing because you think that everyone is judging you. But what you have to think about is that everyone had that same fear of getting up and forgetting their speech. So it may seem embarrassing and humiliating in the moment, but it's something that you can learn from. One, if you're in the audience, you can learn that you don't need to be so judgmental. And then two, if you're the person who forgot your speech, it helps you learn to be more prepared, practice in front of other groups before you go to class. It really is a learning experiences. So leaders prefer to win because they have won before. So if you're a leader, you've got there because you've had successes in your past. But it's really important to understand that a lot of leaders failed and are still very highly successful. And we'll look at some of those examples. So, but when we avoid pain, it generally makes things worse for us. So if we don't admit our failure or if we hide from it, then it generally makes the situation a lot worse than would have been if we would have just accepted our failure at the beginning. So what I want you to do is I want you to stop and I want you to click on this video that is in your regular PowerPoint. You won't be able to click on it in this current video, but click on the Shonda Rhimes and go out and watch her video where she talks about facing her fears. And if you don't know, Shonda Rhimes is a writer for several very popular and very successful TV series, including Grey's Anatomy and Scandal, and I believe How to Get Away with Murder. So go out there, watch that, and then come back to this video and tell me what you think, or think about what you think. And if you want, you can tell me in your discussion board. So, in your journal. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So go out, watch the video. I'll see you on the next slide. Every single one of our failure leads to us building our leadership character and our resilience. So we have to learn as leaders, and even as individuals, it's okay to make mistakes when you're trying, but you do need to think about your actions. So being able to learn from your mistakes isn't a free ticket to not try and just make rash decisions every day. But if you are making calculated decisions in order to reach your goal, then that's okay to make mistakes as long as you are thinking about your actions beforehand. So as we grow, we realize that everything is not black and white. There's not always a clear cut right and wrong. And we talk about that a lot with the organizational leadership program, that we thrive in the gray because a lot of life is gray. So failure teaches us about those intricacies of life and success. So you can do everything right and still fail. And you can do some wrong things and not fail. So that tells us that we really have to be conscientious with our decision making, and understanding those types of things. So surviving, learning from, and thriving in failure requires all of the leadership dimensions that we're going to talk about throughout the semester. So when we really think about failure, we have to think about the idea of be afraid and do it anyway. And that is what we talk about with courage and going out and embracing the world. These are some of the leadership dimensions that we're going to talk about throughout the semester. But the first one is vulnerability. And it's not easy to be vulnerable when it comes to failure because, again, we don't want to admit that we failed. Again, it's the F word that we really don't want to say. But if we are open to it, and then we won't, if we're not open to it, then we won't try. And if you don't try, then you're definitely not going to succeed. So sometimes we fail because we're trying to be someone we're not, and failure reminds us of who we are. So be honest with yourselves and others about that failure is difficult, but it can also be a very positive thing. You're going to fail eventually. If you haven't failed yet, I promise you it's coming. But you have to have the courage to know that you're going to fail and still try. Overconfidence can cause failure in leadership, so that's something to be mindful of. It can also lead down a dark path of leadership. But failure actually keeps us humble because it reminds us that we are not invincible. Um, and then oftentimes that we are most hardest on ourselves. But we can learn to love ourselves through failure. I don't know how many times that there has been something that I have failed at, or there's been a mistake I've made, and I have probably spent, the whole rest of the day, all night, and the whole rest of the week just thinking about that mistake and being hard on myself for something that I did wrong. And probably the person who noticed my mistake probably thought about it that one time and has never thought about it again. So we do need to learn to love ourselves, even through our failure. And that is when we get to compassion. Loving yourself is going to be a very important part of our chapter that talks about compassion. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. And that is probably one of my favorite sayings because it is so very true, especially when it comes to failure. So the Stanford Graduate School of Business's Advisory Council identified denial as the biggest obstacle to becoming a better leader. So if we're in denial about ourselves, about our failures, about our strengths and weaknesses, how will we ever work on ourselves? So if we don't accept that we failed, how are we going to ever learn from that mistake? So typical reactions to failure are denying that it happened, trying to undo the damage without making it worse. So before we have to go admit to our boss that we messed up on something, we try to fix it. Downplaying the mistake as insignificant. So trying to say that, oh, that mistake really wasn't that big of a deal. And then reframing success as a failure. One of the greatest examples that I think of denial and just not accepting our failure is President Clinton's impeachment. So we all think about President Clinton getting impeached because he had an affair, but he didn't get impeached because he had an affair. He had an impeached for lying under oath about the affair. So had he just admitted that he failed and admitted that under oath, then he wouldn't have gotten impeached for lying under oath. So it wasn't the failure that um, caused his demise, but it was the denial of that failure. So now that you've all become experts on accepting your failure and learning from it, you need to make sure to adopt a learning orientation in your organization as a leader. So executives admitted that only about 2 to 5% of the failures that happened actually deserved blame, that someone deserved to be blamed for them. But about 70 to 90% were blamed on somebody. But what we know is that blaming and shaming shuts people down and they become disengaged and respondent. So as a leader, you're going to get better results when your followers don't feel fear punishment. So since you know that mistakes happen and that everyone will fail at some point in time, you need to create an environment that it's okay for your followers to fail and that you're still going to encourage them and be supportive of them. So there is a correlation between the company's tolerance for mistakes and revenue for profit and growth over a 5-year period. So if you're more tolerant of people making mistakes, then they're going to be more inventive, they're going to be more creative, and they're going to try harder because they know that it's okay for them to fail as long as they're trying. And that is going to lead to more profits for your company. So we really need to focus on humility instead of punishment. And that is what helps people admit their mistakes, is that when we focus on learning from our mistakes and admitting that we need to learn more instead of just punishing someone. So there's a difference between being achievement oriented and being learning oriented. So achievement oriented are mostly motivated by performance and material success, whereas learning oriented are motivated by opportunities for development. So again, when you're a leader, you need to think about which you want to be, because if you're achievement oriented, then you're going to be upset if someone didn't meet their goal and you're going to punish them for that failure. Whereas if you're learning oriented, you can be okay with someone not meeting their goal if they learned and they're getting a little better every time. You need to see what can be improved instead of what can go wrong. So really looking at the bigger picture of like, how can we improve our followers and how can we improve the situation and um, how can we do better? So we have a tendency not to investigate the causes of good performances. Um, and again, like we talked about, we don't really investigate success, but sometimes things need to be adjusted and that we might have been successful by a fluke instead of what we actually did. So companies tend to go through cycles of safety where they focus on safety standards right after an incident or an accident. So if someone gets hurt on the job, then we tend to have, 5 safety briefings and a whole new set of counselings and those types of things come in for the first couple of weeks. But then after a while, we kind of go back to that previous level where we didn't have quite as much motivation or as much focus on success. So when we talk about, we really need to be careful to not forgive and forget the failure. So we can forgive the failure, but if there was an accident, we need to not cycle through and forget the lessons that we learned from the accident and then forget the lessons that we learned from the safety briefings afterwards. So really keeping a continuous process of learning from all of our failures is really the best way to adopt that learning orientation. So, some people in some companies have become really good about embracing the idea of failure. These companies understand the importance of taking risks and learning from failure because if you're going to be inventive and innovative and come up with the next big idea, you're going to have to fail a lot of times in order to do so. So one of the examples of this is X, which is Google's Innovation Lab, which actually encourages failure and has become known as a cult of failures. One of my favorite quotes about this is the head of the project evaluation team says, "Why put off failing until tomorrow or next week if you can fail now?" But because of this concept of embracing failure, we have things like driverless cars and glucose monitoring contacts. So their embracing failure has clearly been successful because Google is now worth over $1 trillion. So I think that their idea to embrace failure is definitely being successful. Next, we look at NASA. They actually have an innovation award called Lean Forward, Fail Smart Award. And then there's a advertising agency that has a heroic failure award. So they're actually embracing the failure because they know that that's actually going to make them better. Then we have the Museum of Failure, which is in Sweden, and so it really embraces failed products that probably most of them you've never heard of because they were failed. And then, ironically, the Museum of Failure failed and had to file bankruptcy in 2017, but they were trying to be innovative. Um, there was a professor at Princeton who actually posted a failure CV, and it highlighted all the academic programs that he didn't get into, all of the journals that he had ever been rejected from, and funding he didn't receive from grants that he had put in for. But what all of his failures did is it drew more attention to his current academic body of work because then they saw, well, if you failed at all these things, what have you done right? And then it drew attention to all the journals he did right and those types of things. Um, and then finally, Apple's Newton Message Pad. So I do encourage you to click on the link in the regular PowerPoint and go and look this up. But it was called the Newton Message Pad 120, and it debuted in 1995. And it cost the company $100 million to come up with. So $100 million is a lot of money nowadays. It was even more in 1995. But the project was killed in 1997. Um, so it cost the company a ton of money and was a monumental failure. But what it did do, because we learned from it, it became the basis. It was followed by the Palm Pilot, and that became the basis for all of our smart devices today. So you wouldn't have the awesome phone in your hand that you can Google this to make sure I'm not lying to you. If we didn't have this terrible Newton's message pad that was a monumental failure. So part of learning from our failure is self-reflection. So without self-reflection, we really can't learn from our failure because self-reflection sharpens our intellectual accuracy, our emotional honesty, and our visceral expression. So through reflection, we recognize what is going on around us. We recognize our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, and we recognize um, how they influence and impact us. So we are often prone to misinterpreting our experiences because we overreact to negative feedback. We need to take a holistic approach to our perspective, and this includes honing our judgment because one of the things that happens is that we are judgmental by nature, and so we tend to view ourselves and others in different ways. So we need to take a holistic approach to our perspective on our failure because we tend to think of our suffering as greater than others. So if something happens at work and we don't feel like we're treated right, then no one in the whole company has ever been treated as bad as I have been treated. Um, and then we tend to think of our efforts of having more of a factor in the success or failure than realistic. So we tend to think, again, this company would not run without me. The only reason why they're successful is because I'm here. And in some cases, that may be true. But in the bigger scheme of things, one individual is not the end all be all for the success of a company or failure of a company. So we need to see ourselves as part of a bigger picture. And in order to do that, that takes emotional intelligence. And in order to have emotional intelligence, we also have to have self awareness. So to develop self awareness, we have to reflect on others. As we improve our self awareness by gaining a deeper understanding of our emotions, of our strengths and weaknesses, um, we need to be aware um, that we are not defined by our failure. So, when we talk about reflection, we also have to reflect not only on ourselves, but on the whole situation. So we tend to want explanations for our failures. And so reflecting on our failure can help us learn from it and help us plan for the future. So in the military, we have what we call the AAR, it's our after action review. And so during that, after any event, we go in and we say, what were we supposed to do? So what was expected to happen? Then we say, well, what actually happened? Because sometimes those are two different things. And then we talk about what went well, and then we talk about what can be improved and how. And then from that, we take those, okay, what went well? So let's make sure that we do those things next time and plan for those things. And then what needed to be improved? So then we say, okay, well, based on our plan, we need to change how we approach this part of the exercise because it didn't go well. Um, so really, you need to have these post-event evaluations for everything in your life, even if it was successful, because again, you can figure out what made it successful, and then sometimes how can you improve something even if it turned out to be a success, because it can always get better. You should always be improving. So one of the ways that we can do self-reflection is through the Johari window. And so this is really a model for self-reflection and how we can, this helps us to assess how we view ourselves and then how others view us, because those are not necessarily the same thing. So there are four parts of the Johari window. So there is the arena, and this is what is known to you and known to others. So if you were to go ask somebody, um, what are five adjectives that you would describe me? If there's an adjective in there that you would also describe yourself. So for instance, if I said that I was independent and my best friend said I was independent, then that would be something that was known to me and to others about myself. Next, we have the blind spot. The blind spot is what is unknown to you but known to others. So this might be something how they would describe you that maybe you wouldn't describe yourself like this. So if my friend said I was patient or I was caring or I was hardworking, and I didn't know that they had viewed me as caring or patient, then that would be a blind spot because it's something that's known to somebody else but not necessarily known to me. Um, then we have the facade, which is what is known to you but not known to others. So this may be if you're are inventive, if you're logical, if you're practical, it may be that you're creative. Maybe you like to write and you've never told your friends or family that. Maybe you like to play an instrument or you like to sing. So you're very creative, but that's something that's only known to you and it's unknown to others. And then finally, we have the unknown. And this is what is unknown to you and unknown to others. So obviously, you can't put anything in that box. But this could be something that comes out in the future. So it might be something that you discover about yourself, maybe through this class and through your journey of learning about yourself, or through an event that you have later on. It could also be something that your family or friends realize about you as you go through life. So maybe your unknown is your determination. So your determination to finish your degree, and that was something that maybe the people didn't think about you as determined prior to you starting your educational journey. But when you finish, they're like, man, you really are a determined person. And so this could be revealed later on, but currently it's unknown to you and unknown to others. Practicing mindfulness is a way that can help prepare us emotionally for failure. So we tend to have these knee-jerk reactions to failure, and so it could be blame, it could be shame. And this is especially when it's something that we are sensitive or self-conscious about. But what we have to understand is that we can't control what happens, but we can control how we react. So in order to do that, we have to recognize our emotions and then so that way we can figure out how to control them. So when we practice meditation and mindfulness, we can help find our inner calm. We share our human struggle. It helps us to stay focused. It helps move us away from fear and really to feel more self acceptance. Many companies have understood the importance of mindfulness and meditation training. So, for instance, Google offers a training called Search Inside Yourself that helps its employees with these types of things. There are a couple different types of training. There's attention training, and this is the skill to bring your mind to a calm, clear place no matter what's happening. So, kind of to draw attention to what's important in the moment. There's self knowledge training, and this is once you're calm, you create the quality of self knowledge and awareness. And then there's the create a mental habits, which is creating a mental habit of kindness. So, for instance, like every person you encounter thinks something like, I want them to be happy. And this really puts you in a calm place. So, mindfulness helps us build our emotional resilience and compassion because it is very easy for us to be overwhelmed and to have high anxiety about things. So I have actually come up with a mantra for myself when I feel my anxiety getting out of control that I can say over and over in my head. And if my anxiety is getting really bad, then I write the mantra down over and over again until I start um, feeling better, because that's what grounds me and brings me back to my place of self awareness, that I can control my feelings and how I react to the situation, even if I can't control what is happening. Taking care of our bodies prepares us physically. So, failure often provokes physical reactions. So, um, we are hardwired to be angry when we encounter failure, and we often react with fear and panic. So, when we're stressed, our bodies actually produce a physical response. So, this can be your blood pressure increasing. This can be some people, their neck gets red or their ears get hot. So there's actually these physical reactions, and they can be positive or they can be negative. So you've heard of fight or flight, but there's also freeze. So when we are scared and we have that fear and panic, so you might want to fight, and you know, and this might not be physically fight, but this could be maybe fight for your idea, which could maybe escalate a situation to a place that it shouldn't be. This could be flight, where you just want to run away. So you maybe just get up in the middle of the meeting and leave, and that's definitely not good. Or you freeze, to where you can't talk, you can't move, and you really just don't know what to do. So you in addition to learning how to take care of your mind and prepare that mental resiliency, you also need to figure out how to prepare your body physically for this. So physical activity decreases our perceptions of and our sensitivity to stress, because exercise itself is a stressor, so it already increases your heart rate. So as you're exercising, you're learning to deal with some of those physical reactions already, so this serves as a buffer for whenever you actually experience stress. So if we get used to that adrenaline, then it's not of a big of a shock to us, and then we won't react to it when we're in a failure situation. So you want to know the difference between a master and a beginner. The master has failed more times than the beginner has ever tried. So in order to become a master, you have to be okay with failure. So we're going to do a little exercise here. It's a failure wisdom exercise. So, what I want you to do is right now, as I'm doing this, if you have to pause it, then go ahead and pause. Um, get out a piece of paper and something to write with. On one side of the piece of paper, I want you to write down 3 failures you've had in your life, or that you think are failures. So for instance, my failure is that I have been divorced. That's one of the things that I do consider a failure in my life. On the other side of the paper, I want you to write down something you learned from that failure. So for instance, from my divorce, I learned that sometimes it's okay to put my mental health, my emotions, and my goals above others. So that is something that I took out of there, knowing that as much as you can care for other people, sometimes you have to do what is best for you mentally and physically. And so that is a wisdom that I took out of there. Okay, so I want you to pause the video, write your things down, and then come back. So hopefully you guys have got all your failures and all your wisdoms written down. So now what I want you to do is I want you to take that piece of paper where you have your failures on one side of the page and your wisdoms on the other, and I want you to tear that piece of paper in half and then throw your failures away. But I want you to keep those wisdoms. Because again, we can learn from our failures and we don't have to be worried or think about or regret our failures. That is not what defines us. What defines us is those wisdoms that we learn from those failures. So as you move through life, always remember you get to throw your failures away, but you get to keep those wisdoms that's going to make you a better person and a better leader.